I learned very young, right, that there are systems in play that operate at the advantage of white people and at the disadvantage of Black people.
Because on this soil, really the only true natives are the Native Americans, right?
I still have days where I'm like, God damn, like I don't love what I'm looking at in the mirror.
They say to the world, you might be one person, but to one person, you might be the world.
Hello, hello.
Hello, beautiful.
How are you? Thank you for having me. Yes, shakes.
Yeah.
We love that.
I love the shake. I love the hugs.
Yes,
I love the energy. This is good. Welcome. So how was your travel in? You were coming from Philly, right? You're in Philly?
Was. 25-minute ride.
Okay,
not too bad. I still can't believe there's snow on the ground, but we're doing it.
We're doing it. We're doing the snow. We're doing the cold. We're doing the turtlenecks. We're doing whatever we need to do to keep warm these days.
Yes, absolutely.
But you know what? It's really, for me, it's interesting, Holta, because I feel like in Philly, it's been pretty mild winters, right?
I agree with that.
And so when I think about the mild winters and then everybody's complaining about how cold it is, I was like, we are spoiled.
Right.
It's been like, I don't remember a winter like this where, I had to bundle up and all that. And it's like, brr.
But I think people's reaction speaks to the fact that we're spoiled.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that we are spoiled.
No snow. And Mike had to shovel my car out. Now, here's the thing. Here's the main thing about the whole car thing. Because I was reading a couple things on social media. And there's two different schools of thought. One school of thought is if I shoveled my car out, it's mine. I'm going to put like a little table or a little chair, and I'm going to get in a fight with you.
And I'm ready for parking wars.
Because it's mine, right?
Yes.
The other school of thought is like, well, it's public, right? Now, I don't know how you feel about it. I think I'm a little petty when it comes to kind of this, right? I'm in we don't necessarily have to shovel a space out. We have a garage. But if I spent all that time shoveling
then it's
my
mine.
car, I think I might be like those other petty people, like, don't touch my parking space.
I hear you.
But then the other angelic side of me is like, oh no, it should be for everybody.
I'm so grateful to have a garage. That's crazy.
Me too.
And so for that reason, I'm just happy to step out of that conversation.
So it's not you. So you're privileged as I am,
I'm very much
but
privileged.
There's a whole lot of people because it's Philly. It's an urban city. And so I thought to myself, you know what? I want to talk a little bit more about what that really means because I think that there's another layer of that, which is the sweat equity that we all put. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be with snow.
Correct.
Now, the sweat equity that we put in our lives and what does it feel like if we've invested so much and then someone comes along and they want to snatch it, right?
Yes, we like that.
Because I think it was Joy Reid that said this at one of my conferences. She said, people don't steal what's not valuable.
I love that.
All right. And I think about all the things that have been stolen from Black people, from brown people, from poor people, from the most vulnerable, from immigrants, all the things that have been stolen. And we want it back.
Absolutely.
But it may not happen that we get it back in the way
that we envision it.
We envision it.
Absolutely.
It might be that we have to take our power back in a different way. And that kind of starts with us. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Always. Always. But look at you making that analogy.
Listen, welcome to the Ask Dr. RG podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Here is where courageous conversations connect. And we're just going to get right into it.
Let's get into it.
Have a courageous conversation.
Let's get into it.
So I just learned something, which is that you went to Central.
I did.
And
shout out to 265.
Woohoo. And see, I don't even want to say my number.
But it's okay because you're a girl side girly.
I'm a girl side girly.
Okay.
227. When I was at Girls High, which I absolutely love my alma mater, there was Girls High and then there was Central.
Yes.
And Central was all boys
at the time,
and girls was, Girls High was all girls. And so I loved it. We could see our little guys in the front, before school started or after school. And then I went off to college. I went to Howard, of course.
Okay.
The Howard University,
yes.
Right? The greatest school on the planet. And
we'll give Howard that today.
We are. We're a little obnoxious. I know that. We're a little obnoxious, but we
rightfully so. I'm here for it.
But so right when I went away is when I think that next year is when Central introverted and it became co-ed.
Girls.
And part of the thinking was that some of the classes that Central had, Girls High didn't have. But we could go there and get those classes. So I don't really know if that was the whole underlying premise of the fight. But nevertheless, it did get integrated. Girls High never got integrated. And it seemed like, the girlies had a great experience at Central.
No, absolutely. I loved it.
Yeah.
I always say this, Central changed my life.
Really?
Absolutely. It's a huge part of the reason why I entered the education system. So before Central, I went to a Title I school. Okay, Austin Man, right, down the street from Lincoln High School, serves predominantly Black and brown kids, right, living below the poverty line.
Got it.
And then I went to Central, right, magnet school. Everyone wants to learn.
Smart kids.
Absolutely, right. They're smart, absolutely, but they're also well-resourced, right? They get the best of the best teachers. And so that dynamic is what I witnessed and experienced firsthand as a young person, right? So I went from a Title I school into a magnet school like Central, and you naturally start to ask questions, right? Like, why does this environment that serves Black and brown kids feel this way, look this way, right? And why does this environment that's so much more diverse for the very first time, right? Because yes, I'm a white woman, but at the time I was surrounded by Black and brown kids, right? And so for me, going to Central was a culture shock, right? And so for the first time, I'm seeing Indian kids and Asian kids and white kids, right? But it also felt different. The teachers taught differently, right? The kids asked questions. They were inquisitive, right? And
they were curious, right?
They were curious, right? And so as a young person, when you have those questions and you seek answers to those questions, which I did, I learned very young, right, that there are systems in play that operate at the advantage of white people and at the disadvantage of Black people, right? I saw that as a young person very early on, right, which is where my curiosity, right, started. And that is where my passion for education began, right? I went to University of Pennsylvania. I learned about Teach for America. Right. I have my thoughts about Teach for America. We're going to table that.
All right.
But one of the amazing things that it did do for me is it exposed me to education. Right. It got me in the door and it made me realize that I'm valuable, I'm needed, right? And I don't need to go anywhere. Right. Because I don't know if you know much about Teach for America, but a 2-year commitment is enough. Right. And for me, right, like if you take a step back and think about that, there's something inherently wrong about it only being a 2-year commitment. Right? Because we're essentially, and there goes the thoughts, I can't even help it, right? We're essentially saying that we're okay with being a part of the problem, right? We're seeing teachers go in and leave out. So is 2 years enough? You know what I mean? So that's one of, my pain points with Teach for America. But nonetheless, it exposed me, right, to the amazing work, right, which I could not step away from. Because when you experience it and you realize like how much our kids are shortchanged, right, in more ways than I can count, right, and you realize that actually this has nothing to do with my kids and their zip code and what they look like, right? This has everything to do with everything outside of that.
Systems.
Absolutely.
It's the systems that are not designed for us. Those systems are designed for the highest echelon.
Absolutely.
Those systems are designed for white people.
Absolutely.
The systems are designed for rich people. The systems are not designed for poor, for Black, for brown, for immigrants. They're not designed for that. And so when I think about teachers, and this is something that's really interesting, Morgan and I, we started this podcast back in the pandemic. And we recognized that in the pandemic, there was going to be a fallout with regards to mental health in the Black and brown community, that which the likes we had not seen before. And so that's when we sort of put our heads together and was like, okay, let's create something that will educate, that will provide more awareness, that will provide assessments, and that will create advocacy and equity. And that's where Mental Health First Connects was born. And what we realized in doing that is that we're struggling in our communities and we need voices that speak up.
Absolutely.
And, one of the things I wonder, because as a kid, I was a very, very shy little girl. I didn't speak above a whisper, really, I mean, it was okay because all these thoughts were in my head, right? Absolutely. And speaking about teachers, my favorite teacher in 5th grade was Mr. Pizzo. And Mr. Pizzo is still around. Mr. Pizzo flies planes. He's living his best life. Not too long ago, I put something on Facebook and I was like, this was my favorite teacher and I was the teacher's pet. And all these students were like, no, I was the favorite. I was like, I thought I was the favorite. But I learned something about humanity during that time. And because teachers are extremely valuable. And so I had a courageous conversation with Mr. Pizzo. I asked him a question. I said, you know what, Mr. Pizzo, why are these two boys so bad? Right? I thought they were bad. Their names were Kenny and Marcus. And I was like, why are they so bad? He was like, I don't know, Archie. Why do you think they're so bad? And I was like, well, my mother said that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. So maybe they don't eat breakfast. That's what I thought. I mean, I'm in fifth grade, right? And he's like, okay, well, what do you want to do about that? And I said, well, can we just go to the grocery store? That's where the food is, and get them breakfast? And he was like, okay.
Let's do it.
He goes to the grocery store. He brings a hot plate. He was like, you invite them. We all get to school earlier than usual. He cooks some bacon and eggs, and we're up there eating. And my parents did not even know that this was going on until I had an intervention. Because I was a family therapist before I was a family therapist,
I love that.
So I won the humanitarian award. But after these kids started coming to class for breakfast, something else happened. We built a friendship.
I love it.
And I was like a kid that was teased, kind of bullied because of my name. So I was like, well, why don't you guys come home with me? So they became my bodyguards. So they walked me home. We're doing our school together, schoolwork together. My father comes home and he's like, who are these boys up at my house? I was like, oh, they're my friends. We have breakfast and together in Mr. Pizzo's classroom or what have you. But again, they became friends for life. They've since passed on, but it shows me and you the power of the impact that teachers can have on students. They say to the world, you might be one person, but to one person, you might be the world.
Absolutely.
And so for you, you start out as a teacher and then become a principal.
Yes, ma'am.
And do you miss the impact?
I miss it so much. It was the hardest decision I had to make. So, and it's all recent. I just recently, so fun fact, I just got my consulting LLC in August.
In August,
last
congratulations.
Year. Thank you. But it hasn't even been 5-6 months, right? And so it's all very, very new. It was the hardest decision I had to make. I used to quite literally live my life saying my kids, and I don't have any kids, right? My kids.
Oh, that's what we have in common.
Right?
I don't have any children either.
My kids as in my student need me more than I need me. I would live my life quite literally, right? Putting my students at the forefront and justifying why it was okay for me to sleep 2 hours on average for 10 weeks at a time. Right?
So and so you weren't taking good care of yourself.
No, absolutely not. But guess what? I'm not an anomaly in that, right? When you think about how powerful, how incredible teachers are, they're doing phenomenal work every day. But guess what? They oftentimes do that work at the expense of themselves. Yes, it costs them their peace, right? Like all of these things that we oftentimes don't see because they're not showing it. And that was essentially what my experience in the education space was. Yes, it was beautiful. Yes, it was impactful. Yes, it was fulfilling, right? Yes, it's what kept me going. But because I did it at the expense of myself, I knew that I could not continue at that pace, right? And still expect to be here much longer. So I had to take an entire year off.
Wow.
I did.
So you chose you.
I did.
In that moment. You chose to prioritize you in order to elevate, to become the better version of yourself.
But guess what? I don't even want to take the full credit because that's God. And when we don't listen, because I wasn't listening. That's why I can't take the full credit. I found myself in a similar situation, that I had been in before in the education space. And when we find ourselves in similar situations, we didn't listen to something the first time.
Exactly.
So I can't take credit because God put me in a similar situation where he told me, it's time to leave the building. Not because you're done with education. I'll never be done with education, right? I'm an educator. I'm an educator to my core, right? And I still to this day am an educator in everything that I do. But I needed that time, right? To take a step back and realize, actually, there are healthier ways to do the work. Right? And it doesn't have to look like this, and it doesn't have to feel like this, right? And how many other women are occupying spaces that stopped serving them 3 years ago, right? How many women are not even aware that they're burnt out, right? That they're occupying chronic stress-induced environments, right? That they're a week away of getting a heart attack.
Yeah, yeah.
Had to take a step back. And so I'm grateful that I was able to get to a space where I was able to get in front of, right, the accident. I was able to get in front of what could have happened.
Right.
Absolutely.
Not intervention, prevention.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it then became my mission, right, to help other high achieving women, right, who were so used to just pushing and going and prioritizing everybody else outside of themselves.
Well, that would be all of us, Holta.
Absolutely.
Would be all
Right.
of
But
us.
this is why, right, coming back full circle to what you said about why it's so important for us to share our stories and share our truth, is because some women don't feel like it's all of us.
Yeah.
And they need to hear from you and from me, right? And from people that look like they got it together, right? Because we don't look like what we're going through. That actually, I feel you, sis. That actually, I'm going through that too, right? It gives people an opportunity to say me too, and it's powerful.
So I heard you say that at the Summer House Institute, and you talked about Me Too. I have a friend named Tarana Burke, and she had the Me Too movement.
Oh, I love it.
And one of the things, and I actually was a servant leader at my church for the Sexual Abuse Survivors Ministry for 10 years. Really, really beautiful journey, a beautiful journey with survivors that were working towards not just surviving, but thriving. And Tawana was a part of that ministry. What was unique about that ministry is that it was a ministry of survivors that were working towards thriving. All of us, not just the facilitators or the members. We all had our experience of having been sexually abused and telling that story. And one of the things that struck me really, really powerfully is when you talked about being authentic and telling your story, because there are other people on the side of that, on the other side of that story that need to hear it and need to have the hope that they too can traverse through their trauma, their pain, their injury, their background, their families of origin, all of that, right? And if you don't have someone that is in front of you to give you that vision that I can get through there too, it makes the struggle even more difficult.
Always,
right?
absolutely.
So I want to talk about this idea of you coming here at 8 years old as an immigrant. I don't know that life because I literally live and work and play in the same area that I grew up in.
Right.
Well, 15 minutes from here.
Right.
When my parents migrated, my father in particular from the South, from Eden, North Carolina, and my mother's family came from Sumter, South Carolina. We kind of landed in this area. And for the most part, my grandparents, my aunties, my uncles, my cousins, all in this area. And so I often think about what it feels like for someone who has to go far from their homeland, where they land in a place where they don't speak that native language, where they have to reintroduce themselves to a community all over again. And I think that to me, that must be one of the hardest things that anybody has to do. And when we're having these conversations about immigrants, right? And there's lots of immigrants. Some people don't want to acknowledge that they're immigrants, right? Because on this soil, really the only true natives are the Native Americans, right? But for you as a little girl, for you as someone who actually wants to show people who you are and whose you are, how did that transpire for you as you became a woman? How do you think about that?
Great question, because I oftentimes don't even think about how challenging it was for me. I always think about how challenging it was for my parents, and then keeping that at the forefront of every decision that I made, right? I would always, as a child, right, keep my parents' sacrifices at the forefront in a way that no child should ever have to do, right? And I think
stop right there. Why did you feel like you needed to do that part, like as a child? Like, because that sounds like being parentified. But sometimes the child is not taking the cue from the parent. They're just being overly responsible in ways that they should never be.
Absolutely. But we oftentimes take that on, especially as immigrants, because we're quite literally seeing not only what our parents sacrificed, right? My parents were my dad was a professional soccer player. right? Like the whole country knew him. Till this day, when he goes back, they retired his jersey, right?
Wow.
But he had to sacrifice that. Even after that, he was a professor. He had his PhD, had to sacrifice that to come here and work at a pizza shop and then get punched in the face the first week, right?
Oh my
And so
gosh.
for me as a young person, hearing that, seeing that, knowing where he's coming from, right? Like you inevitably take on a lot of that guilt without even wanting to. It's sometimes unconscious,
Yeah.
right? So when students would, and I didn't have a drink until I was 28 years old, right? So just to give some context around, yes, I was always a popular girl, right? Yes, I was always a pretty girl, but I was always a smart girl too. And at a young age, I knew that the two can coexist, right? Which is really, really important. But I didn't feel like I had a choice but to go to the best school in the high school in the city, but to go to the best college and go to an Ivy League school, right? But to go to grad, it wasn't an option for me. It didn't feel like that just because
you have the weight of your ancestors and your parents on your shoulder. You can't fail because they didn't fail you.
Absolutely. And I knew how much they sacrificed just for me and my sister to have the opportunities that they never did, right? And so for me, it's like I had to move differently at such an early age, but then that lends itself to people not fully understanding you, right? And like why you're moving in the way that you are, right? And so you can imagine as a young person choosing, right? Do I go left? Do I go right? Right? Like everybody's here, but like I can't even physically see myself here because my parents wouldn't allow it. So girl, get your butt over here. You know what I'm saying? That was a constant day-to-day reality, right? Especially being a popular kid, especially being a pretty girl, right? There's all of these things we don't talk about, like the dynamics, like when it comes to like that we have to face, right? Or the intersectionality between all of those things. It's very, very, it's a lot for a young person.
Yeah. So, when I think about this idea of the standard of beauty, I can remember as a teenager eating food for comfort.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And part of why I ate food for comfort is because I looked around and what I thought was beautiful didn't look like me. The dolls were white, right? Not black. I had, beautiful Christy. That was my doll, and she was black, but a lot of the other dolls were white. My sisters were thin. I kind of was more curvy, right? And, I didn't like that. I looked in the mirror and I didn't like what I saw. And I thought that everyone around me needed to be slim. They were slim, so I needed to be slim too. And when actually my mother saw that I was in some distress, she took me to the doctor. He put me on a diet. And so therefore I was on a diet while everybody around me, including my thin sisters who I love dearly, they could eat whatever they wanted. And so I felt like there must be something wrong with me. That sent me on a spiral. And this is why I always say, pay attention to your children and what they're doing differently than they've always done. Because my grades started slipping. I started hooking in school. I started gaining weight. I started engaging in high-risk behaviors. And all of that was because I wasn't feeling good on the inside.
Absolutely.
And so when I think about even your story and you as this beautiful woman growing up, right? But I wonder in those communities that you were in, if in some ways you were either too light or too dark or probably not too dark, but also the way in which you speak because you grew up in a community. And so for a lot of folks that I sometimes work with in therapy, especially if they're in these communities where they don't look like the people that they see, they're not enough of this or they're not enough of that. And that can impact their self-esteem too. Did that happen with you?
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't even speak the language when I came here, right? And so it's like, where do you really fit in? But what's crazy is like, I was more embraced by the Black and brown community, right? And I was always more able to see eye to eye with the Black and brown community. I was able to relate more to their struggle, right? While acknowledging that, yes, I'm not a Black or brown woman. Yes, I am a white woman, but I am an immigrant, right? And I did grow up, right, with two families. When I first came here, I had to move in with my uncle and his family, right? Because my parents couldn't afford to get our own house. And then when we eventually moved, that's when I went to a Title I school, right? And so, of course, like even there, I was one of the few kids that's not Black, right? And so like, how do you then begin to learn to navigate in those spaces and still show up as your authentic self, especially as a kid when you don't even know what that means?
Right.
Who am I really, right? And so you do inevitably take on some of these behaviors like of your friends, etc. But as an educator, I think about this all the time because I'm like, what was it within you that didn't fall victim to drinking and to smoking and to doing all these things as a young person, right? Like, was it truly just your parents, right? And what you saw from them? Or is there some like intrinsic like motivation that is an individualized thing? I don't know. Till this day, I don't have the answers, but I think deeply about it, right? Like,
I think it's nature and nurture,
yeah,
right? It's what your parent gave you. It's your journey. I always say our family of origin impacts us earlier, more frequently, more powerfully, more profoundly than anything else in the world, right? And so you had this unique shared experience with your family, and you traversed here at 8 and then began to feel the emotional and the physical and familial responsibility of what it meant to be here. And so it's great that the community engaged you. I was listening to something that you said, and it warmed my heart because you were on this panel and you said, I want to hold space for the Black women. And sometimes you don't even take opportunities because as a white woman, you understand that you need to hold space.
Absolutely.
I can tell you, Holta, that there are not a lot of white women that often do their necessary work to understand that. And so as a result, when they repair to you, it's often out of guilt versus their deeper level of inner work.
Yes, absolutely.
And for me, I don't want the guilt.
Correct.
I want white people to do their work and take responsibility for this anti-racist movement that we are all in collectively so that we can move the needle together for humanity.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's why that warms my heart. Because not many people have the courage to actually say that in the public sphere.
No, absolutely. And it took me a while to get to that space, right? To have like the confidence to know like I've done the work, right? And as someone who's done the work, when you understand that as a recipient of that privilege, right? Like you too are responsible for perpetuating the same systems from which your privilege stems from. Unless you actively work against it, then you have no choice but to show up and act, right? And do the thing because you understand that you too would indirectly be a part of the problem.
Well, you have a choice because a lot of people choose the other choice.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
But you chose not to,
for sure,
right?
For
and
sure.
and then you can, I believe that then you become a model for other, specifically women, white women, to say, oh, I got more work to do.
Yes.
We all have work to do.
Yes,
there is no perfect human on this planet, but the work may be different if we're going to actually move in the same direction for humanity.
Yep. One of my favorite things, and I talk about this a lot, is Beverly Tatum's book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together at the Cafeteria? And she talks about anti-racism a lot. And she relates it to a conveyor belt at the airport. And she said, if you are racist or anti-racist, right? Like, unless you are, like, think about the conveyor belt. If you are walking straight across, right? You're still going to end up, the pace might be different, at the same exact space as someone who's racist, right? You would have to actively walk against, right? Not to end up in the same space. And so it just goes to show that you can't just say I'm anti-racist, right? Like you actually, there's a recognition, an awakening that happens, but there's also work that needs to be done, active work, right? To not end up in the same exact place as someone who's actually racist.
So a question I have that is just kind of in my head, which is this idea of pretty privilege. Has that ever been an issue for you? And if so, tell me how you process that.
Interesting, because I actually don't think a lot about pretty privilege. And I always, like for me, I've always, believe it or not, struggled like aesthetically. And that's why even when it comes to my workouts, I don't do workouts for an aesthetic. I do them to regulate my nervous system, right? Like, and so even that is very different for what's commonly pushed in the health and wellness space. But the reason I say that is because And that's not to say that I'm oblivious of it and that it doesn't exist. I'm sure, right? Like people, just because of what I look like, right? Based on societal standards of beauty, may get certain opportunities, right? But this is also what we were speaking to around like having the awareness to be able to say, I'm getting that opportunity just because I'm that woman, right? Or I'm a white woman, or I'm a pretty woman, right? Where I fit this standard, right? So I don't want to be oblivious to the fact that it's a thing, but I also want to acknowledge, because I think there's this misconception that just because someone by societal standards is beautiful, that we automatically assume that they too feel beautiful. Right. And I think that's the conversation that I want to have around, like, I've always struggled with that because of my childhood in the house, right? Like I was raised by someone who was very hypercritical of me, right? And it wasn't a conscious thing. I love my mother, right? My mother loves me. My mother will tell me I'm the most beautiful girl in the world. But guess what? I would literally be in my couch, and the first thing she would say is, "What'd you do your eyebrows? Because you go to the gym today?" Right? Like all of these things that
probably her own internal issues that were being projected onto you.
Always, right? And as an adult, I'm able to acknowledge that. But as a baby, I wasn't. You just take it in, right? And so I had these insecurities about myself that maybe other people would never know or understand existed. But until recently, I had an eating disorder in college, right? So when you talk about, your upbringing and how you went and resorted to food for comfort, in college, I had abs and I still developed the eating disorder. Body dysmorphia is a thing. That's what I'm getting at, right? So it's just something to think about, when we see people, right? And we want to make assumptions about what they're dealing with or the type of life that they lead, right? And as I always say, is we don't look like what we're going through.
And we don't look like what we've been through. That's right.
Right? And so we can't make those assumptions. And so for me, it's still like, I still have days where I'm like, well, goddamn, like I don't love what I'm looking at in the mirror, right? And like that's a moment, but now the difference is I have the awareness to be able to say, that's your mind.
Yeah, and then reprogram your mind
and
so that
and repattern, right? And there's another belief that belongs there, right? Who taught you to stop to hate what you look like? I think Malcolm X says something like that. I love Malcolm X. But who taught you to hate, the color of your skin, or who taught you to hate your hair or what you look like, right? So for me, it's like it's been more of asking myself really hard questions around, why does that thought even exist?
Right. And then the reprogramming, because now you are responsible for that shift to self-love and self-awareness and self-worth and self-value. Now that responsibility lies within you and not all the messages that would seek, quite frankly, to diminish that. So that's awesome. I want to take a hard left. Tell me about this idea of being single and also dating journey. I will tell you that I've been, I never had a problem dating. When I wanted to date, I dated. When I didn't want to date, I didn't want to date. But I also know that I had a conversation with my sister, several years ago now. And one of the things that happens, Holta, is I believe that when we have very specific experiences, it changes sometimes the trajectory of our lives. And my experience was that my mother became ill and I became her caregiver. And she was ill for 3 years and then she passed away, but she lived a beautiful life. I call her my Queen Elizabeth. I carry her in my heart. During that journey, though, there was a way in which I was moving that wasn't so good for me. I became angry. I was resistive. I was not very pleasant to be around. And it was my older sister that checked me and was like, "What are you doing?
Like, what's happening?
What are you doing? Like, why are you acting like this?" And I was like, "I don't need anybody." And she was like, "That's what I said. I don't need anybody." And she's like, "Girl, stop it. That is, first of all, not who you are.
Correct.
Second of all, you need to get rid of those placeholders," because I had all my friends that I would hang out with, male and female friends. And she was like, those placeholders on a Friday night, they need to be reserved for somebody that's going to be your husband, right? And then I would have my aunties in my ear saying, "Girl, when you getting another degree, you're going to just educate yourself right out of a man." So there was all these messages around dating. But the most powerful one was my sister, who said, if you want to be in a relationship, you have to actively be intentional and purposeful about it. Just like you've been winning in all these other areas, you can do that too. And so I shifted my intention. I realized I was kind of like a nucleus of one plus a dog.
Yeah.
Because I had my family, but I had hoped my family, yeah, we're all nucleus. But then when my mom got ill, and my father was like, my mother, me and your mom, we do this. And my sister was like, well, me and my husband, we do this. And then my other sister was like, well, me and the kids do this. And I was like, wow,
Right.
it is really just me and the dog.
Right.
And I was like, if that's not on them,
Mhm.
that's on me.
Yeah.
To like really stop lying to myself and be more focused on what I want.
Correct.
I am curious about how your dating journey has been,
Yeah.
and if that is something, have you ever lied to yourself about something like that?
Always.
Always?
I mean, let's be honest, right? Like so one of the things that first came to mind was, I would say like my last relationship that was like a very toxic relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to kind of flip. So like the opposite of what you're speaking to, which is like when we occupy spaces or are in partnerships that stopped serving us 3 years ago, but we're still occupying or staying in those spaces,
yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that's the other end of the spectrum, which is like, I don't need men versus like,
I'm going to just be in this
I'm
toxic
going to be
relation.
in this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I actually want to focus on that just because I think that was such like a pivotal moment in my life, especially how it changed like how I date. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the questions that comes up a lot around that relationship is why did you stay in it as long as you did? And what I love to talk about is this idea of survival mode, right? Like at the time I was a first year principal. I mentioned that I was sleeping 2 hours on average the first 10 weeks. So yes, I was in a partnership, right? That didn't feel good. Yes, things were happening in that partnership and it would hit me and it's like, ooh, that didn't feel good. But do I have time to process, right? And unpack, right? And really open up that can of worms right now when I got 540 kids and families
You're like, I'll get to that
are depending on me tomorrow. Oh, I'll get to that, right? But then it's I'll get to that and I'll get to that and I'll get to that before you find yourself in a situation that you should have left 2 years ago.
Yeah, keeping people
right?
past their expiration date.
Absolutely. And that's more or less what that was, right? But it really harmed me in more ways than I can count, right? So because when it was finally time to take a seat, right? It hit me like, I mean, the biggest weight, right? Like around even when it came to my intuition, right? He completely stripped me of my intuition, right? So now I'm second guessing myself, right? I'm second guessing all of the things. It was almost like the sky's blue and he'd be like, nah, it's red. And I'm like, but it's blue,
narcissistic
right?
tendencies and gaslighting, all of those
absolutely.
things.
And
it makes you think you're second guessing yourself.
You internalize it. You internalize it. And it doesn't matter how beautiful you are, how strong of a woman you are, right? Because people love, right, to throw those labels and assume and make assumptions that like your life can't possibly be challenging or you can't possibly experience these things, right? And it's like, I don't give a damn who you are. I don't give a damn who you are. You are still, right? Someone who could be victim to that.
Absolutely.
Right? And let's talk about
discriminatory.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, but I share that to say, then my dating life became an unlearning, right? Of like, what is actually healthy for me? Like, what does Holta actually want? Has Holta actually taken the time to sit down and ask herself, does she want a family? Does she want kids? Right? Or is that just the understanding because somewhere down the line, somebody
told you
that that's what it should look like, right? Same thing with men roles, right? Like women needs to be more domesticated, gender roles, or cook or clean or do all these things, and that's not real to me, right? Like I had to ask myself, it's like, do you see your life like that, right?
Otherwise, you would become miserable.
Correct,
in it.
and resent the other person and resent everything, right? And so the last few years, my dating life has been more or less a me trying to get clear on what it is that I need, who it is that I am, right? Like, because again, I lived a life of just as an immigrant, being on go, pushing through, right? Like prioritizing work, making sure that I'm going to make my parents proud. It got to a point where my mother would quite literally be like, girl, get up, go out. What are you doing, right? Because she didn't want me to be in a similar situation to her where she had only been with one person her entire life. And my parents are divorced now. And so she was with him for close to 40 years. But that was, and that's a separate conversation around culture, dynamics, etc. Like they thought people would look down upon them if they divorced. But again, like for me, I'm still in a place where, and again, I'm a lot closer now that I've started to ask myself those hard questions. But even when you talk about courageous conversations, some of the most courageous conversations I've had to happen with myself.
Ooh. that part, because even in the first chapter of Courageous Conversations Connect, it's radical self-care in action.
Absolutely.
And for you, it sounds like you're still on that journey. And so I want to, this is how we usually in the Ask Dr. RG podcast, we always ask a particular question at the end. And that question to you is, what is the thing that you are most scared of as an adult? If you had to have that courageous conversation with your younger self, what would you say?
You know what's crazy? And I'm smiling because I'm still unpacking, and I'm very introspective, and I think about these things a lot. And one of the things that people always talk about was like the fear of the fear of failure, right? But for me, it's not the fear of failure. It's the fear of success and everything that entails. And I've taken a significant amount of time to unpack this around what is it about success that worries you, right? And then what came up for me, it was like what other people think, right? Like what other people are gonna say. And I was able to break it down to my perfectionism, right? And like this people-pleasing nature that started when I was a little girl, right? And like pleasing my parents, right? And making sure that I'm showing up as my best self for my parents, right? Like, and then I was enough for my parents because I knew what they gave up for me, right? And so it's interesting, but it is fear of success for me. It is even doing this, right? It took a courageous yes. It took a yes, I'll do the thing. I'm glad I did it. But it was this idea of me getting out of my own way, me getting out of my way and realizing that you have so much value to give. You have so much value to give, right? So if I were to talk to my younger self, it's reminding her, right, that you have so much value to give and never allow anyone, right, or any fear of anything to not get you to step into your purpose. You know, and I'm just grateful to have said yes to not only this opportunity, but to opportunities that at one point were scary for me, right? Because I knew that they could be a stepping stone for something else, which could be bigger. But for whatever reason, that still gives me fear, right? Like, because it's like that fear of like uncertainty of like, what does that look like? What are people going to think? Or are people going to think I think I'm better than them? Or again, it's like this like people pleasing nature that still exists, right? But I think the most important part is like you said, the awareness, the ability to recognize, to acknowledge that it's there. And now we can begin to unpack and process.
Well, let me tell you, Miss Holta, I am so glad you said yes. To the Ask Dr. Thank you for being on the show.
Absolutely.
Would you come back?
Amazing. Absolutely.
And by the way, like I need your help in another way. So this is a beautiful relationship that we're just building.
I'm excited.
And I'm appreciative of you.
I'm gonna give you a hug. You're amazing. Thank you, my love. Thank you. This was great.